Goodman writes for revcom.us and Revolution, the voice of the Revolutionary Communist Party, from a perspective of doing everything possible to end oppression everywhere urgently. His writing exposes Israel's oppression of the Palestinian people. It takes on and refutes defenses for Israel's crimes and sharply challenges people in this country in particular to wake up and to stand with the Palestinian people's struggle. In 2009, Alan was part of the Gaza Freedom March, which attempted to physically break the blockade of Gaza and was violently prevented from doing so by Egyptian authorities under the direction of the U.S. Embassy in Cairo. Alan.
We have heard and seen powerful, damning images and video and personal testimony tonight on the savage crimes Israel is carrying out against the Palestinian people right now in Gaza. And we are here tonight, New York City, in the country that enables all of this, financially, diplomatically, and militarily. We have a tremendous responsibility to act here and now to stop these crimes. During Israel's 2008 and 2009 massacre in Gaza, that you've seen video of, I stood in front of the Holocaust Museum here in Lower Manhattan with a banner saying, "After the Holocaust, the worst thing that has happened to Jewish people is the state of Israel." This is a quote from Baba Vakian, the leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party, and it speaks for itself. By the way, for doing this, I was surrounded by 24 NYPD squad cars with their lights flashing for hours, detained, threatened, and issued a criminal citation that literally charged me with, and this is a quote on the citation, displaying a sign criticizing Israel without a permit. A small concentration of the separate set of rules that apply to anyone who criticizes Israel in academia and public life and so on. Before I stood outside this museum with that banner, I toured the museum and I spent considerable time in the section of the Holocaust Museum that had documents and photos and descriptions of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising that took place in Nazi-occupied Poland in 1943. The Warsaw Ghetto was a densely populated outdoor prison where the Nazis locked down the surviving Jews in Poland in 42 and 43. Jews were not allowed out, no one was allowed in. Outside the walls, the populace was whipped into and incited to savage hate and fear of the Jews. Illegal smuggling, yes, some through tunnels, was the only way that people could survive. When Nazi troops stormed into the Warsaw Ghetto in 1943, they encountered unexpected resistance. Terrorism, in other words, in the parlance of defenders of Israel. They retaliated by destroying the ghetto block by block, escalating the genocide against the Jews and others who were victims of the Nazi Holocaust. Now, I'm sure you're thinking about the extreme and ominous parallels between what you've seen and heard about what's going on in Gaza and what the Nazis did in the Warsaw Ghetto. But we're not the only ones who see those similarities. In 2008, Israel's deputy defense minister declared that if Palestinians didn't stop their resistance in Gaza, and I quote, "they will bring upon themselves a bigger Holocaust." He didn't just say another Holocaust, he said a bigger Holocaust. And how do you think the US media responded to an Israeli leader openly saying we are going to bring a Holocaust down on the Palestinian people? Did you hear American leaders say, Holocaust, that can never happen again? I didn't. In fact, when I looked into news archives, I found sympathetic descriptions of that incident. Fox News reported, well, you have to understand, Israel's frustrated with Hamas. Genocide? Another Holocaust? Never again can we allow defenders of Israel to pimp off the Holocaust to justify another Holocaust. When Spanish actors and theater people publicly and courageously spoke out against Israel's genocide in Gaza, John Voight lashed back, saying they were ignorant of the story of Israel's birth. We can't let people get away with that. No. You, John Voight, are ignorant of the whole situation. You were a cheerleader for Bush's war on Iraq. You were a cheerleader for the weapons of mass destruction lies. You are ignorant of the whole story of Israel's birth in ethnic cleansing.
Right.
And now you are ignoring how genocide is going on right in front of your face, so shut up, you fucking ignoramus. There are two ways to interpret the lessons of the Holocaust. One is, never again will my people be subjected to these things, no matter what crimes we have to carry out against other people. The other lesson comes from the perspective of starting from the interests of humanity, that never again can people be paralyzed by confusion, by denial, by feelings of impotence while terrible crimes are being committed. We must never forget and never forgive the crimes Israel is committing. Just as the Nuremberg trials prosecuted the leaders of the Nazis for war crimes and crimes against humanity, there needs to be another Nuremberg-type trial now to put the leaders of Israel on trial for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Defenders of Israel, apologists for Israel's crimes, shout at us, what about those Hamas rockets? Well, get real. These are small, ineffective rockets going up against one of the most powerful militaries in the world. Look at the death toll. Since Israel began bombing and invading Gaza in July, at this point, I guess it's 2,000 Palestinians are dead, mostly civilians, a quarter of them children. Hundreds of thousands of desperate people are at UN shelters in Gaza. Stop and think about what that's like. Defenders of Israel argue and make the case, and have gotten away with this far too much. This needs to stop now. They argue that the presence and existence of Islamic jihadist forces in the Middle East, like ISIS, that do not represent a positive alternative in the world, and yes, do enforce brutal repression against women in particular where they're in power, somehow justifies Israel's crimes against the Palestinian people in Gaza. Look, we do need to bring forward another way in this world. We're working on it. You can get deeply into what that can be and how to get there at revcom.us. You can find Bob Avakian's new synthesis of communism at revcom.us and Revolution newspaper. And as we unite and struggle against Israel's crimes against the Palestinians, I invite you to make revcom.us part of your life, to get to the bottom of what's wrong with this world and how to change that. Let's put things in perspective. The oppressive actions and agendas of jihadist fundamentalist forces are not in the same league with the crimes committed by capitalism, imperialism, historically and today. This is a system built on the enslavement of millions and millions of African people, on the genocide of millions and millions of Native Americans. This system is not a positive alternative to anything. From its inception, Israel has been an agent of that capitalist imperialist system. It has been part of enforcing a world of exploitation and oppression of every kind around the world, carrying out the dirty work of the United States in places like South Africa under apartheid or Guatemala. Look these things up. Israel is not a bastion of enlightenment in the Middle East. It is an enforcer for a world of sweatshops and slums and oppression and exploitation. So I'll return to the point I started with. We here have a tremendous responsibility to stop U.S.-Israel genocidal crimes now. This could be a moment in history, and I've been around to see a few. This could be a moment in history like when most of the world stood by passively during the Holocaust. Or this could be a moment like when people in the United States and around the world stood up in mass and took a powerful stand against the South African apartheid regime, and that movement was a real factor in changing the equation worldwide about apartheid. Which will it be? In critical way, that is up to us.
Laila El-Haddad is known as the Gaza Mom. She's a journalist, and because her husband, who was trained in the U.S., is also a Palestinian, but one without the Israeli-administered right to reside in or even enter Gaza, she's living here with him, and she's not able to be at home in Gaza with her dear family. Last week she spoke, thanks to the U.S. campaign to end the Israeli occupation, to U.S. congresspeople and mostly to their staffs about what was happening with Protective Edge. And she wasn't able to get up here tonight, but we are going to show you just a little bit of her testimony. Laila El-Haddad.
Palestinians killed. And it's not just, again, figures and statistics. More than 55 families in their entirety, completely eviscerated, by the way. Families huddled together in their homes, children like my family members running for safety. And thousands maimed and traumatized. More disturbing are accounts we hear of UNRWA schools taking direct hits despite multiple reports to the Israelis of their location being given to the Israeli army. Just as recent as 2 days ago. And of course we heard about the power plant being bombed, which I'm very active on Twitter, and immediately after it was bombed, 24 hours later, the Gaza Twitterverse went silent. There were hundreds hundreds, this was what really marked this assault different from other ones, hundreds of eyewitnesses giving, minute by minute accounts as young as 15 and 16 years old as they were being bombarded, as they were fleeing for safety, of what was happening. It went silent. So sort of you can draw the connection there. And I'd like to just end with this account from my aunt, Dr. Muna Al-Farra, who is a physician and a women's and human rights activist in Gaza. And she was seeing a couple of young children in this tertiary care clinic being sent from the main hospital, which is flooded. And she gave this account to me in this email yesterday morning. She said, "First I'll begin with the story of an unnamed child we call number 6. He was around 3 years and I had identifying stickers on his arm saying unknown and number 6. I was shocked. I immediately asked the nurses and ambulance drivers what his name was. I was told no one knew. No one knew. They found him in a mass of destroyed houses. And he was the only survivor of his family. He had a head injury and wounds to other parts of his body. Immediately I asked, doesn't anyone remember where the house was? They said it was in the area where they found him. All the buildings were destroyed and mixed up with one another, and sometimes children are thrown from one area to another, so nobody knew where he lived. Nobody knew. And then I realized, my aunt said, he's number 6. And that means there was 5 other unknown children before him, and many, many more children after him. I stopped asking questions because I needed to do my work. Second is the story of Reem Ahmed, 6 years old. Reem arrived in the X-ray unit. She has a name also, and she used to have a family. She was the only surviving member. She lost her parents and all of her brothers and sisters, and she was injured in the head. These are just 2 small examples of what is being done in Gaza. Now we hear a lot of talk of Israel's need to defend itself, its right to defend itself, of Israel's security. But Israel's security can never be derived from imprisoning, bombarding, systematically incarcerating, demolishing houses, and repressing the indigenous population of Palestine. We're talking about Gaza today, but Gaza is just a symbol of the broader Palestinian struggle. It is, in the words of Mahmoud Darwish, a brutal lesson, a pilot project. And I'll end with this. UNRWA spokesperson Chris Guinness has said on Twitter that after the Israeli attacks on the first UN school, there's been 2 others since this tweet, UN schools turned shelters using military aid, US military aid. We should all hang our heads in shame, but that from this shame should come justice and dignity, and I should add security, freedom, and accountability for the Palestinian people. Thank you so much.